Hello and welcome to Faith in Action. This is a program to put the Christian faith in action in our community and look at ways that our faith can indeed be expressed. It was the Apostle James who said, "A man may say, 'You have faith and I have works.' He said, 'Show me your faith without works and I'll show you my faith by my works.'" Today, we're going to be talking about Remembrance Day, coming up on November the 11th when we remember the war veterans. Two very special guests with me today, Reverend Kees Vandermey of Knox Presbyterian Church in Elora, and Mr. Tillie Seargent. Welcome, gentlemen, to Faith in Action. And we're here to talk about the war, and probably we'll talk a little bit about, from a Christian perspective, how do we even justify war? What's it like to be there and all that sort of thing. Tillie, start us off a little bit. I'm going to play the role of somebody, which is not hard for me to play because I didn't go to war. I was 7 years old when the war was over. So I'm going to play the role of somebody that doesn't know much about it at all, which I don't know much about it. You know, so start us off. What's the cause of the Second World War?
Well, the Second World War, in my view, was the cause of the First World War was the cause. The German people were very unhappy with the Treaty of Versailles, and along came Mr. Hitler and took great advantage of this. The German economy wasn't that great, and Hitler saw his chance through building roads and
I understand he started off as a good leader.
Well, he was good in the German point of view,
Yeah.
but his long-term goal was always the same, to avenge for Germany's loss of the First World War and put it right by being the dominant country in Europe.
Yeah. So that was sort of the springboard of what caused this war. Then do you remember what countries got involved first?
Well, the first country involved, I think, was, I can't remember particularly, but the Austria was involved.
Yeah, he started to conquer countries of
He
Europe.
started to conquer and sections of Europe, and the final one was Poland, and that's where Britain drew the line when he walked into Poland.
Yeah.
And
so then Britain decided to come to their defense.
well, yes, they were obligated by a treaty, but I think by that time everyone was well aware what Hitler's goals were, and they had to defend themselves.
So then Britain declared war. And I think you said, told me earlier that Canada joined in, was it just 3 or 4 days after Britain?
Canada, if I remember correctly, declared war on its own on the 3rd of September in 1939. I think Britain was probably the 1st of September.
Yes, there's only 2 or 3 days between.
Yes.
Now, so Canada declares war, and that meant, if I understand this correctly, that young men a certain age were obligated to join the army, were they?
No, you weren't obligated. The Canadian Army was strictly volunteer.
Okay. So a young man volunteers to join the army, and he has to have some training. How long is the training process?
Well, first of all, when you joined the army, you went into a 30-day training, just marching and general training. Well, then you were either shipped overseas to a unit that was already there. In my time.
So within 30 to 60 days, you could be overseas?
Oh yes, and some people were in the army without any what they called basic training, and were overseas in no time flat. It'd be 3 weeks maybe.
Wow. So you're right into the heat of the battle pretty quickly.
And I should say that it was strictly a volunteer army, but towards the end of the war, they had call-ups that were not volunteers, and I think in the last month or two, some of them were shipped overseas.
What role did you play, Tillie, in the war?
Yeah, I was in the Royal Canadian Engineers, and I first of all was an instructor in Canada. Fortunately, I had a reasonable good education, and you were picked out to take NCO courses. And in the engineers, you couldn't be an officer unless you were a university graduate.
I see.
So I instructed in Petawawa for several years, about 3 years before I went overseas.
Kees Vandermey with us today. Kees, what is your role in all of this war and Remembrance Day?
Oh, I suspect that most of it is my own Dutch heritage. I was born the last year of the war, and people didn't talk that much about it, other than you knew that there was tremendous poverty, and we were also aware of a liberation. But as a child, I really didn't know it all. It's coming more to the fore now. But the result is, sometimes you ask yourself, why do I have a passion for something? And one of my passions for our veterans, and being rather proud of being one of the Padres of the Allura Legion, is my Dutch heritage, where I know that these men and these women were part of a liberation, and you almost have to be in Holland to see how it's appreciated, and you almost have to be in bondage to know what freedom is.
You're wearing a Legion jacket. What's your role at the Legion, Kees?
I'm a co-padre, and the role is more pastoral. A typical routine for me I stop by usually on Tuesday before I go to the hospital, and there's the names of those in hospital will be on the board. Okay. And
you stop by the Allura Legion, do you?
By the Allura Legion. I go right in, and usually I try to have a story or a joke for the boys, and we laugh a little, and then I go and I visit those who are in hospital, along with my own parishioners.
Do you are there certain ceremonies that you conduct?
The Legion services at funerals.
Oh, yeah.
I'm often called to.
Okay. Now, Tillie, let's go back to you for a minute. What's it like to be in the heat of battle? It's hard for me to imagine, to be there, your friends around you being killed, perhaps? What's that like?
Well, I think I'm like everyone else. If you were going to be wounded or hurt, it was going to happen to everybody else except me. Which is the attitude of a lot of people today. And but you work together, and you become very, very close to each other. And a person that you maybe know for 3 months in the Army remains a lifelong friend.
Did you see any of your friends killed?
Actually, to see them killed, no. I don't recall of any particularly. But one of my first experiences in France was we had one of our troops in our squadron went out to clear a roadblock, and were nailed by an 88. And
what's an 88?
An 88 is a German artillery piece, which...
Like a shell?
No, it fires a shell.
Oh.
An 88 was a very sophisticated field artillery weapon of the Germans, and they had them mounted on tanks and too as well. And they were so much superior to what our artillery was.
So these men were building or clearing.
Well, they went out to clear a roadblock at the crossroads, so our infantry could go through with their trucks and so on.
And they were hit by this thing?
Pardon?
They were hit by this 88
They were hit, their direct hit on the truck, and the Lance Corporal was the only one that survived out of 13 men.
Wow.
And all those men were missing in action.
Did you know some of those men?
Oh, yes, I knew them all well.
Wow. What's that feel like? I can't imagine what that must feel like.
Well, it changes your attitude of what war is all about. I think when we went to France first, if a German had have walked up to us, we would have hesitated to shoot him or whatnot.
Yeah.
But when you lost some of your own men, your attitude changed.
What did you feel like then?
Well, you felt that, well, we're going to get them, sort of.
Yeah.
I guess that's one way of putting it.
So you were really into the war at that time, is that? That was the
was
beginning of the war for you, and
that was the beginning of the war.
We had to find a victory.
That's right.
You did my brothers in.
Yes.
Now, Kees, you and I are clergymen. How do we justify this? We're Christian ministers, and we know one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill. And here we are sending our men to war to kill. What do you think?
It's always a crisis for me, because the Old Testament, I can pull out an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You nail me, I nail you. On the other hand, the New Testament's so clear on turning of the cheek. And,
my brothers always used to say, but it doesn't say what to do after that, after you turn the other cheek.
Never thought of that. But, you know, I've watched the movie Gandhi, and you think, wow, the way he, transformed and gained the liberation of India with peace. Turning the other cheek was really what it was all about. And I have fellow Christians who say this is where we stand. But I often find God, the Spirit, in here too. And then when I bring it down to what I like, if you don't mind, Don, a gut level.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It comes down to the day my first son was born, Colin, and I held that boy.
Yeah.
And I was with my wife, and it was an instinctive thing came over me.
Yeah.
I'll kill for them.
Yeah. If I would have walked into the hospital,
I would justify that as my role.
If I would have walked into the hospital and tried to take your son, steal him,
wouldn't have thought twice.
You'd have nailed me.
Yeah, wouldn't have thought twice.
So this protection idea is what comes into play. Actually, you and I both know when it says "thou shalt not kill," the Hebrew language meant "thou shalt do no murder." The same Old Testament, God ordered His people to go and kill, to go and wipe out nations, knowing that if they didn't destroy the enemy would destroy them. So I know that there's still lots of people that feel you can never justify war, and we're not here to convince them otherwise. But I'm just saying, how did we convince ourselves? How do we feel justified? Tillie went to war, and Tillie, you have a Christian faith. What did war do, or how do you maintain your faith through this fighting and killing?
Well, I never counted myself a very religious person when I joined the Army, but with my experiences in France and Germany and so on, I began to realize that there was someone protecting and looking after you, and I think that reinforced my faith.
I heard it said one time that there were no atheists in the trenches.
There certainly weren't, none that I know of.
Yeah.
We all prayed.
Yeah.
At times. I can remember one particular instance when we were closing the gap at Filet, our own bombers bombed us, and you were in a slit trench about 4 feet long and just fit you, and when you seen the bomb and those coming down, you prayed.
Yeah, yeah.
You didn't know maybe what you were praying to, but you soon realized that it was your Christian.
What's the closest call you ever had?
Well, the closest call I had happened about 2 weeks before the war was over. I happened to be the sergeant major of the 9th Field Squadron Engineers, and one of my jobs was to go ahead, and we'd move from one place to another up, advancing, and my job was to find a place for our troops. And this one morning, I was doing my job, and I had a Dutch interpreter with me, staked out a place, and was returning to my Jeep. This was in Germany, about a few miles from Oldenburg, at a place called Sogel. And all of a sudden I heard one shot, a single shot, go over my head. And you knew instinctively. I said, that's not one of ours, let's get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
And we were on a little country road, and we turned around, and the Dutch interpreter that was with me, he had a German car that he had commandeered, and he was coming behind me, and we both got turned around and started back toward the little village of Sogel.
Mm.
And all hell broke loose.
Mm.
There was German paratroops there that we didn't, they must have, they knew I was there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But all of a sudden they opened fire, and how we ever got out of there, that's when I realized that someone higher above was looking after me,
Yeah.
and the little Dutch fellow. We both got out of that,
Yeah.
and I'll never tell you why, except.
Now, here's another interesting thought. Some are spared and some die. Kees, how do we put that into a Christian context?
It's one of those deep questions, and to start with, I think as I hear Tillie, there was comfort in God both sides.
Mm-hmm.
If you were spared and if you died, God was a comfort in the whole war. Is that fair, Tillie?
Yes, I think
Okay,
that's fair.
so I'm hearing a little bit of that.
So some people come home saying, God spared my life. But what about the widows?
That is a real tough one. And
loss.
I would almost hesitate. I dare to argue with Tillie
Mm-hmm.
that God really spare you. What Tillie did experience was that he came home and he shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, his faith in God was strengthened, and he knew he had a purpose for his life because he came back.
There's a sovereignty.
Yeah, I do have real problems, when you speak of the mother of who lost her son.
Yeah.
And how can God do this? And it takes me away from the God who has a computer. It says it's your time. And this is part of a tragic war. God didn't create the war.
Yeah. There's a sovereignty of God. In Scripture, we read where Peter and James were in prison and the church prayed. Peter was miraculously delivered from the prison. James lost his head. Why? There's no answer but the sovereignty of God.
Right. Will we ever know? At this point, God's too big. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I would hesitate to get into it. But I know as a result of that, both men's lives glorified God.
Tillie, have you struggled with guilt over that? Like that you lived and your friends died? What's that make a person feel like?
No, I couldn't honestly say that I felt guilty.
Mm-hmm.
I felt spared, but I didn't feel guilty.
Yeah.
And it's the sort of thing, you're all in this together,
Mm-hmm.
and you know perfectly well that someone is not going to come through.
Yeah.
But to have a guilty feeling, no.
Do veterans feel appreciated?
No. Not in Canada. We have to go over to Holland to be appreciated.
Wow.
And that's very understandable. I think people here during the war, there was a war on, there was victory bonds sold, but they didn't have the real thing, where a person, they were occupied and had the German heel on top of them all the time.
You weren't ducking shells all day long.
No, I couldn't believe when we went to Holland the welcome we got.
When did you go back? Was it the 40? They had two anniversaries, didn't they? 40 and 50 years.
They have one every 5 years.
Every 5.
I went back the first time in ¡85, then in 90 and 95, and I never had a medal on until I went over there in '85. I never wore my medals. I felt it wasn't appreciated, and I wasn't really that anxious to show that I was in the Army.
Yeah. See, I was 7 years old when this was over, and you know what it meant to me. My mother said the war is over, and we had some little flags. I pinned some flags on my bicycle and rode up and down the street. And what it meant to me was my brothers are coming home. It didn't seem, you know, all through my life, I have not had, it isn't that I don't appreciate, it's just that somehow the awareness is not there. Now in my older years, I'm very moved on Remembrance Day now. I wasn't years ago, but I feel almost weepy at Remembrance Day as I go there. See, I lost an uncle in the First World War, 3 brothers in the Second World War, and they all come back safely. But now, when I stand there, I almost feel weepy talking about it right now, because I realize these people died, that I can be here today. And how can we show this better? Maybe that's not a fair question.
Excuse me, I think that there has been a vast improvement in the last few years. I think people are beginning to realize the sacrifices that were made. Mm-hmm. I don't think at the time probably we felt we were being sacrificed in any way, mm-hmm. but we certainly didn't feel appreciated when we got back. Oh. That's for sure. Although the government did a lot of wonderful things that they didn't do to the veterans of the First World War.
Yeah. I think there's education programs in the schools and that these days. It's nice to see the children come to Remembrance Day services.
Yes, that's very true.
That the children are learning the price that was paid.
Yeah, and I think the Legions and organizations such as the Legions are encouraging this and doing something about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It helps me understand the uniqueness of the Legion too, Don, in terms of our veterans. They get together, and the rest of society doesn't understand that they went through things together, and that's still there. Things they don't have to, I mean, a lot of people don't want to talk about the horror of the war, and they can just sit there and know they went through it together.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that, and it's an area of their life we really can't get into.
Yeah.
But we have to respect and honor.
We hear stories of shell shock, and I knew a veteran personally who was watching a parade. I'm not sure on what occasion, but there was a group of airplanes that flew over in formation. This man absolutely panicked. Mm-hmm. This happened in the village or the town of Exeter. He ran for cover. This happened in the last 10 years, but it triggered those memories of the war, and he just lost it and ran for cover when he heard these planes.
He was probably in the bombing that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
it's possible.
So I mean, it really leaves some deep scars on people's lives. So it seems. Want to have a look at your medals here, Tillie. Now you don't need to walk us through every individual medal, but what's the purpose of the medals?
Well, the purpose of the medals, first of all, is to show where you served. For instance, the first medal is the 1939 45 stars, which just simply meant you were in the war. The next one mentions being service in France.
Okay, so the stars sort of indicate.
So they're all an indication of your length of service and the time you served.
And then you have 3 silver medals there, round ones.
Well, one of those, I guess the most important one, is the Voluntary Service Medal.
Yeah.
And on that you'll notice an oak leaf. That is for being mentioned in dispatches. The last medal is a medal awarded to me by the Dutch government.
The brass one in the form of a cross.
The bronze cross.
Oh, bronze cross.
And
there's a couple little ones there above the silver ones. There's a leaf and...
well, that's the one with the oak leaf mentioned in dispatches.
Oh, okay.
And but I feel all medals awarded were a reflection of the unit that you were in and the job they did.
Yeah.
Not necessarily for any great big hero act that you did.
I see.
Personally.
Yeah, yeah. We're going to run out of time here. This has been interesting to have this talk, for sure. On Remembrance Day, there will be services in Salem, Fergus, and Elora. I don't have the times of those, unfortunately, but that'll be announced in the papers and so on. The Elora one is usually 11 o'clock, isn't it?
It'll be 11, 9:30 in Salem.
9:30 in
if
Salem.
Tradition continues.
Yeah. And then Fergus, I think, is...
It's always 11.
Always 11. Mm-hmm. And we would like to just challenge people to come out this year. Some days it gets pretty cold on Remembrance Day. Can you tell us, Tillie, why it is November the 11th at 11 o'clock?
Well, that is a heritage from the First World War. The peace was declared at the 11th day of the 11th hour of the 11th month.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? The 11th day, 11th hour, the 11th month. And so we gather, rain, snow, or hail, to remember. And one thing that's always said at Remembrance Day that I find very moving, it just says, lest we forget. I want to close this program today by reminding you all of another death that happened that we might live. These soldiers, many of them lost their lives that we might live and enjoy life and have freedom to live in this country. The other death I want to tell you about just quickly is the Lord Jesus, because here's another life that was laid down that we might have eternal life. And the Apostle John said, a verse that we all know by memory, for God so loved the world, and that's the key. He loved this world so much that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. I trust that's your testimony. Thank you for watching Faith in Action today. It's been a privilege to have these men with us, Reverend Kees Vandermey and Tillie Seargent. Thank you for coming. God bless.